We are in Williamsburg on the corner of North 10th and Berry. This building, I think, is an old warehouse or mill building or something. I am subletting this space probably for another year. It's a nice little quiet, small studio. I like it. I'm always sort of thinking about these sort of surface views of things and how you can see dimension in a two-dimensional rendering of something. I do have a sculpture background, so I guess maybe that ties into it somehow. I'm always, even as much as I try to flatten things, I'm always ending up having some sort of modulation in the surface. I like to think that they could be interpreted in different ways. They could be seen as, a three-dimensional view of something. My father's a scientist, so I got exposed a little bit to, I guess, this sort of high-tech world. He's a physicist, and I can remember going to his lab once and just being completely overwhelmed by the amount of machinery and wires and cables. I think this was back before computers were as small as they are now. So they had computers that just took up entire rooms, and just cables everywhere and magnets the size of delivery trucks. So I was pretty amazed by that. And I also always really liked looking at maps. I always felt like I could sort of transport myself into this space just by sort of roaming around them. The USGS topographic maps were just amazing to me because they have just thousands of details and just endless amounts of little lines, and you could really just feel like you're roaming through an area. And I spent a fair amount of time in the woods, probably growing up, and sort of feeling lost in the detail of just plants and whatever was around. I guess that probably is sort of why I like to get lost in a page. Sort of different focus. Well, my process is fairly straightforward. I pretty much just sit down with a pen and some paper and start going. I don't usually have a plan, although sometimes I have an idea in my head when I start. But usually by the time I get working, it just changes. I'm really looking at what's on the page and reacting to it, so it's very fluid, like a stream of consciousness that crawls along at a snail's pace, because I'm working with one single line at a time. So whether I'm working with pencil and building up, stroke by stroke, or with ink where it's just one line, it's just a matter of building it that way. And that's sort of, the process is not so connected to the subject matter, if you want to even think of abstraction as subject matter, but the ideas kind of grow out of these different sources that I like to look at. Aerial photography and satellite imagery, all kinds of microscopic imagery and anatomy. Anything that's sort of represented in two dimensions, which started as three, kind of gets thrown into the stew and comes out in a drawing. Yeah, the pens that I use for these ink drawings are these rapidograph pens that used to be the standard for draftsmen before computers came in. They're really sort of annoying to work with because they tend to clog and dry up, but if you're really careful about maintaining them, they work really well, and there's nothing else I've found that makes a nice, consistent, really fine line. And with these I can replace the color. They actually have a little reservoir, and you can mix different colors, and so you can choose the color you like to use. So I use a really fine point for doing outlines, and then I use a broader nib for filling in colors. I also work a lot with pencil, and that's just really straight up these Mars pencils, with a electric pencil sharpener. And I might go through 20 of them for a big drawing, because I sharpen them up a little pile at a time and then work with them for about 30 seconds, and then I have to sharpen it again. So the paper I use for these ink drawings is a Strathmore plate surface Bristol. It has a very smooth surface, so the ink does not bleed. So I get a nice crisp line. For the larger pencil drawings, I use a rag paper that's usually for printmaking. It's like has more of a tooth, and it comes in big wide rolls, so I can do larger drawings. I usually work on several drawings at once, meaning they're in a pile in a drawer, and then I have several in process at one time. And I'll go through them in the morning and decide which one I feel like working on, and I may work on it for an hour, or I may work on it for the rest of the day until it's done. It's sort of just depends on how I feel. Some of the drawings take, maybe a day to do, and some of them take, upwards of a month to 6 weeks. Depends on the size and how much sort of density there is in the marks. But when I'm working, if I think about how much time it takes, I would probably go insane. So I just sort of focus on the spot I'm working on and try to sort of be there and be in the moment, as the cliche goes. So yeah, they vary, and I like to jump around. So when I get bored of one thing, I can take a break and start with something different. Most of my favorite artists are dead, probably. The old masters, Dürer and Da Vinci, and those. I think of them as people that made art before television, where they had nothing to do but really focus on what was in front of them. But I do like some contemporary artists. I like Alex Ross a lot. He's a great painter. Chris Burden's always been one of my favorites. The way he uses scale is just amazing. And a lot of the Hudson River painters I really like too. Thomas Cole and Church and all those old guys painting, each little leaf in a giant landscape. I used to get swallowed up in those. Often I'll have an idea in my head, but once I get working, it'll change, and that sense of discovery is really important to me. And not knowing what I'm going to end up with is really interesting. Where it's headed, I don't know. I've always thought I'd eventually bring in some form of actual information as a sort of a structure to build on. Maybe I start with a plotting of polluted water sources or something, and then connect them somehow with the sort of drawing that I do. But I don't know. It seems a little contrived, and I want to sort of keep it consistent with the way I work, which is very sort of fluid and stream of consciousness. I'll work bigger again. I'll do some larger works, and I don't know where it's going. That's sort of half the fun for me.